All right,
Oh,
joining me
okay.
now, Dennis Mitchell, Breakfast with the Beatles. Dennis, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been hosting Breakfast with the Beatles. It'll be 30 years every week on January 6th. Radio is my passion, music is my passion, and I was lucky enough in the early 90s that the two were brought together by some management at a radio station, and I've never looked back. I do a weekly show about the best band ever, and try to find some new interesting angle to telling the same story again and again each week. So that's what I am and who I am on the radio, loving the Beatles, loving rock music in general. But what would it be without the Beatles? So it's nice to get back to the bedrock of it all, and the roots of what we know as popular modern music these days every week. That's me, radio and music.
Now, of course, the Beatles headed up by John Lennon. 40 years ago, tomorrow, today, yesterday, depending on when you're listening or watching this, uh, Lennon was gunned down in New York City. Where were you when you heard this news?
I was in the same place as millions of Americans and my friends watching Monday Night Football, and I was eating pistachios. I only recently remembered that angle of it, but and my wife and I had been talking. We were in a conversation, and I only heard Howard Cosell say, uh, "Shot in the back, dead on arrival." I didn't even know he was talking about one of the Beatles. I just heard him say, the way he delivered the news inferred that it was somebody famous or somebody, that this was a big news story. I didn't hear who it was. Almost immediately the phone rang, and a friend from the Bay Area called me to say, "Didn't you hear?" And I said, "I heard, but I didn't hear who." And he said, "John Lennon." And I just fell silent, and I just told him I didn't know what to say. It was a double whammy, and so that's where I was. Uh, and but where I was when I was able to grasp it and accept it, that was 3 weeks later. So I was in my living room, like I said, watching TV, and it didn't really sink in at all at first. And I was just telling another interviewer that my coping mechanism involved the next morning getting up and turning on the cassette recorder and recording news broadcasts on radio and television. It was, because that was my foundation in broadcasting as well as journalism, and that kind of helped pound it into my head that this had actually happened. And I saved all those recordings over the year, and I used over the years, and I used them in the most current edition of Breakfast with the Beatles. I don't normally do a show about John's death each year because on my show he's alive every week. But I heard from so many listeners this year that it's 40 years, and are you going to be doing something? I got those old recordings back out and kind of weaved together a little bit of what it was like that night. It hurt so incredibly much. It was just too much for a lot of us to absorb right away. Um, uh, but that's where I was, and that's how it hit me.
So do you think that his death has really changed the trajectory of your life? Did it affect you that deeply?
Oh, in some ways, yes. There will always be what John meant to me. He was my political guiding light in high school, right after he left the Beatles. And there's always been the sense that John was our friend, much more than just an entertainer, but somebody we looked up to and believed in, or kind of hung out with us spiritually all the time. But how it affected me was I had never lost anybody close. I'd never had anybody die that was close to me at the time that John was murdered. So there was that layer of trying to understand that, and experiencing for the first time in my life that level of loss of another human, related to you or not. And like I said, John, we all felt like we were related to John. He would always be there. The Beatles would always be there. Uh, so no, it didn't change
Mhm.
my feelings about John in what he instilled in me. And to this very day, I still live my life by a lot of those precepts. But in terms of life and loving relatives and having a loved one taken from you, I learned a lot from that. That sadly, that was the experience that taught me those things.
Now you mentioned almost in passing there politics and John Lennon. Um, for a long time, they kind of went hand in hand. This is before, obviously, the murder. Um, for a while, Nixon supposedly was going up against him to get him deported so that Nixon could get reelected. And then that also ended up involving the FBI here in the States.
Right.
And there ended up being hundreds of pages of FBI documents that were eventually released through, countless courtroom hours and whatnot. What do you know about the FBI investigation and/or the government in general's investigation into John Lennon? Was it warranted? Do you think did it lead to an atmosphere that wasn't needed at that time? What do you think?
Yes. I can stop you right at your question right there. Yeah, it lended to an atmosphere that wasn't needed. And you're talking about, the J. Edgar Hoover days in the FBI when, we look back and we've learned a lot of things about the agency and those days that were not so savory and do not come out making the agency look very good. And when you pick on a guy like John Lennon for a Trump pot conviction from what it did 5 or 6 years before that, you're really grasping for straws. Fans knew this through and through. I think the only people that angle and that the pursuit of John got through to were the conservatives that were Nixon's base. And like I said, it seemed when you look back, how insignificant, what a gigantic waste of time and money to go after a guy like John Lennon, as if that was going to do anything for you. If anything, it backfired enormously. And to this day, we see John as a persecuted figure because of that.
Now, the man responsible for his murder, Mark Davis Chapman, still in prison to this day. Has been up for parole, 20 times, 11 times, I
Something
believe.
like that, yeah.
Just was denied parole again this in August. Comes up again in about a year and a half or so. What are your feelings on the thoughts of this man, this being ever getting out of prison?
Well, that's a good question because those things are unpredictable, and as much as the very notion of right and wrong would dictate that he never get out of prison, the law and administrative, the way things happen, sometimes it's out of our hands and we don't understand. I think it's in his best interest that he never get out. And I think it's just terrible that for 40 years we've been trying to get over this. For 40 years we've been trying to accept it and move on with our lives and realize it's something we have to live with every day. And every 2 years, this guy's name comes back up in the news, and we're forced to deal with it again. We're forced to relive it all over again. On my Breakfast with the Beatles show, we don't say his name ever. And I've had many guests on that you don't speak his name. And I have to confess that on the show that I'm running this week, that does have a lot of those good radio highlights that I mentioned. One of them is from Mutual Radio the next day, and they go right on and say that his court arraignment is going to be that morning with his name. I meant to bleep that out, and I forgot to do it. I've been kicking myself ever since. But it's that sensitive a topic among Beatles fans. He should not have gotten off with second-degree murder. I mean, how much more evidence do you need of a calculated, premeditated, cold-blooded act? If you don't go to prison for at least for life for that, what do you get? So that called some of New York's laws into question, had some people buzzing and going, well, how can that be? And then we know why. You have to be a police officer, security guard in order to get life in prison for killing somebody that way. So like I said, just it adds insult to injury that we have to endure. A, that he's still around, and B, that he's still eligible to be freed every 2 years. It's tough. What kind of surprises me, human nature being what it is, if you read his statements every 2 years when this comes up, there really doesn't seem to be, it really does not seem to have gotten to him how serious what he did was, And that fascinates me as well, just from a human nature standpoint. It's like, wouldn't you kind of, with the weight of the world looking at you and reminding you what this guy meant to what, wouldn't it kind of sink in up to now? It really kind of doesn't seem like it has. That's fascinating in a bad way.
Do you think the when that happened, the politics of the time, and just the general atmosphere in the country, do you think that played into him acting out like that, or then there's the whole Catcher in the Rye end of it, or is this just I don't want to say lone wolf, but just a outlier?
It's a good question, because it doesn't get asked that often. The politics of the murderer. Over time, and it didn't take that long to work up the judgment. He's just a nut job. This guy just did not have all of his. He just had too many screws loose, it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
But I do seem to recall in the very beginning, when he first put out any statement of any kind, they seemed to be of the nature of, well, who does this John Lennon guy think he was? Like there was a little undercurrent of jealousy to, this guy shouldn't be so famous. So there's that.
All right, getting back to something a little more pleasant, remembering John Lennon. So you have I'm sure you have an upcoming show, tomorrow being the anniversary of him leaving us. What are you planning for your next show?
Well, it's in replay right now. It just aired over the weekend, and it is it's like a collage, you could call it. It's very little narration. I'm only in the show for a little bit, actually narrating. I just put the segments together, layering these audio clips I've told you about from the night it happened, reaction clips in the weeks after, with some of the music he had been making up to that time, and then some of the music that came out after he died. Yoko released some songs he had been working on, so pertinent. I'm Stepping Out, how much he loved New York, Living on Borrowed Time, ironic stuff. So I used a lot of that. I've been getting very good reaction from fans who I guess remember it the same way I did. It traumatized us. Walked around in a daze for weeks, like I said. And as a rule, year to year, I do not do a show on John's death, because he's alive on my show all the time. We celebrate his birthday with a big 2-part special every year, but I don't do this kind of thing every year. I made an exception this year because I heard from a lot of listeners just saying, are you going to do something because it's the 40th? So that's basically really only why I did, kind of to touch base. It's part of the story. It's part of the arc of the Beatles. It's something, as much as we detest it, sometimes you have to stop and look at it. It's part of the history.
Now, you personally have, where none of us are supposed to be doing any big traveling this year. But in years past, have you ever made the trip out to New York to Strawberry Fields?
I've been there twice. A cross-country trip with my wife in '85, and that was when I went right up to the Dakota and right to the spot it happened and all that stuff. And I went back in 2000 with a friend to see a concert, and we strolled through Strawberry Park, and people were singing songs, and we were right there at the Imagine Circle. So yeah, I've been there, and it really makes you think. It makes you feel feelings, that are good and bad. I can't explain it. You actually have to stand there on the Imagine Circle, look at the Dakota, and it all flashes on you how it had to have been that day. It's almost too real.
And with all this happening now, and this year has just been, well, it's been a year.
Yeah.
There's some good news out there. One little bit of good news was that there's new remastered Lennon recordings put out. Have you had a chance to go through those, and what do you think?
I just scratched the surface. There's a collection called Give Me Some Truth that has what are called ultimate mixes of some of the songs from Imagine and his more political stuff. And I love it. I love it. I love revisiting that stuff. I love when they treat it in such a way that I hear instruments more clearly than I did before, or I can pick on the drums or the bass or any particular thing, and it's much more clear. I enjoy the process, these remasterings and occasionally remixings, which is a whole different thing. And these are remixes where it's basically somebody else's idea from the ground up, taking all the recordings instead of it being produced live to a certain sound. So I like it. I enjoy it. It is good news that they continue to put out the product. The songs speak for themselves. They're never going to die. They're not dated. All those messages are still absolutely relevant. Instant karma, power to the people, give peace a chance. These things are never going to get old. So to brighten them up so that we can enjoy them all over again is good news. And it is a little melancholy and bittersweet too about Yoko. She's very old now, and from all reports, kind of frail. I've always seen her as a beacon of strength through it all. I'm a great admirer, and it's more amusing than anything else now to hear people people wear T-shirts say "still pissed at Yoko." Well, okay, but can't you at least show a little respect? And like I said, I am a huge admirer of her and how she's handled it, and she's kind of shown us the way as far as being strong through it all.
Good. Now, real quick for our audience that may not be familiar with you or your work, Dennis Mitchell, Breakfast with the Beatles. How can people tune in and listen to what you've got for them?
It's on 80 radio stations worldwide, all free radio stations, mostly AM, FM stations. Got a few on the internet. We're in Australia, New Zealand, all over the place. And the website is BeatlesRadioshow.com. And if you go to the listen page, it'll tell you what radio stations it's on, and if there's one near you, what time it's on. And if you miss it, even with all of that, up at the top of the listen page is a replay of the most recent show. And as of right now, the show I've been talking about, the John Lennon Memorial Show, is up and running. So you can download it, listen to it, and enjoy it for the next week. And I appreciate you asking. And like I said, it's been a labor of love. Celebrate 30 years on the air, January 6th.
All right, congratulations. Well, thank you for taking a few minutes, and we look forward to listening to that show.
My pleasure, Duncan. Thank you for asking.